I mean, how much like especially with your I guess look thinking about your artwork and knowing that you're doing stuff with like animation and toys, it kind of makes sense now. Whenever I see or hear creators like go with that, like it has so much life to it and it has like movement to it, not just like action that feels standstill and going panel to panel, but you could feel like a certain fluidity with your art and even with your characters, even yourself like portrait that you have as your character, like along everything else, like you feel like the animation from it. Do you think that's like really what carried you through to your comics to make them feel so vibrant?
Um, I like to think so. I've definitely heard people comment a lot on that aspect of my work, which I do appreciate. I'm glad that there is that quality um, that adds so much life and fluidity. I I can definitely, like, I'll be honest, I'll admit, like, even going through school, through like grade school, I've always had an interest in animation. And then I did get to dabble in it a little bit, in my career, even though it's
Mhm.
not my focus. Um, but I think I like it more as far as like the animation aspect and approaching things in that way.
Mhm.
I like it more when it is on my terms versus like if I were to pursue a career in animation. I don't really think that's necessarily for me.
Mhm.
Um, so I really enjoy like getting to dabble in like storytelling that's like animation esque,
Mhm.
um, on my own projects.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's kind of just pulling your favorite parts of something and utilizing those
Hmm.
aspects of it, instead of being because once you devote yourself to something or a certain craft, you're kind of like continuously exploring it and continuously pushing your levels within it. And I feel like that's what you're doing with comics, but you like pulling from these other, aspects to see like how it elevates your current art. And I feel like that totally comes together too, because it looks like you do that with a lot of things. Like I know you have a Mexican heritage, and that's cool. I love hearing that too, because I'm from El Paso, Texas. So I'm half Mexican, and I just like love finding other like creators like that too. And how did you feel like to bleed that in? Like, what about like your heritage like inspired you so much to like actually pull into your art and through your stories?
Oh man. Um, Careful, you might open a Pandora's box there.
Love to, please, yeah.
I mean, Husk is really born from my own personal journey with that part of my identity. Um, my my relationship with my Mexican heritage and background is very very complicated. Unfortunately, like my parents tried very very hard to raise me away as far away from my culture as possible.
Mm.
And as fate would have it, I moved in with my abuelos when I was a teenager. So I
Nice.
was like, I was so far away from it, and I like never learned the language. And then when I was 12, I was like suddenly like plunged into all of this culture
Oh,
and all
rad.
this history. Um, but it was enough time prior to that, that I still always felt a little bit like I didn't quite belong,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And so, navigating into adulthood, I always felt a little bit unsure of myself. I would get boxed into various boxes. I would
mhm.
get picked out by, the oldest, whitest boomers. Like
Yeah,
I'd be asked like that most annoying question, like, "What are you?" And I'm like, "Eh."
it makes the blend,
um,
yeah,
and I just wouldn't know how to call them out on that shit. Number one.
yeah.
And two, I didn't know how to stand my ground. I was just like, I don't know. I'm just whatever people want me to be.
Mhm,
Um, so, in 2019, as actually around Dia de los Muertos, I decided, you know what? I'm going to put in some work. I'm going to find my center, find my authenticity, and try to rekindle that relationship with my roots, reconnect with that on my own terms. Husk comes from the research I was doing and my own like personal attempts to reconnect. And as I was doing my research and I was like learning more about not just Mexican culture in the modern day, but also where it comes from.
mhm,
Both from the colonizer side, and then also like the indigenous side, I was really connecting with the Mexica beliefs around death and its role in the cyclical nature of life, death, nature of all things, um, and how it's this very neutral part of our existence, right?
Mhm.
And that it's not considered quite in the same way that Western culture sees it. It's not this
Yeah.
taboo. It's not an end all be all. It's a transition. It's a transmutation.
Mhm.
Um, that clicked with me. That like instantly connected. Um, and I wanted to write a story that pulled a lot from my own experience, from what I was going through, um, and at the same time be this, testament to like the love I really do have for that heritage, for who I am, um, that for so long had felt stifled.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So
Yeah, definitely.
that's really what I pour into my comic.
That's so cool. And I love what you said about that too, because death is something that, like, especially in Western culture, American culture, just seems like the scariest, most daunting, like
Hmm.
horrific. Like it's something that you're kind of off put by in a big
Hmm.
sense, you know. But there's so many cultures that accept it like wholeheartedly with love and caring, and it kind of takes you somewhere else. And I think that's a big thing to kind of like introduce and show people is that it does hurt, it is a painful thing, and knowing all of that, but like there's a beautiful way to look at it as well. And I think that's something that people need to understand a whole lot more, and sending that message. I always say on the show, like, whenever we talk about storytelling in general, but storytelling is
Hmm.
survival information. And when you're giving someone something to believe in and a different perspective to look at something that they're scared of, and you're helping them get through that, that's survival information. That's what you're doing with your stories. So like helping people and guiding them in that different mindset, it's such a beautiful thing to do and take on. And especially because it sounds like you're reconnecting with a deeper part of yourself as well. And I mean, there's so much of part of your life that kind of connects within your comics, from, your heritage, from even your punk aesthetic. I even noticed seeing you in person that I like adore so much. I mean, we're all about like punk anthologies and everything. And so we've always really connected with that too. But also like you're a queer comic creator, and I think that's
Hmm.
so like beautiful. And you also introduce some of that into your comics and your work. And
Yes.
we have creators like Max Flowers that co-host everything with us, so we're always trying to highlight some of our better, like, amazing creators like that. And it's so cool hearing that you actually tie in not only that but with your Mexican heritage, and it's all part of you, and that you're
Yes.
really kind of revealing to the world through your art. Can you speak more about that? Like, how was that difficult for you to even approach with your art? Because even with Mexican heritages and backgrounds, like, I'm growing up with my friends and family, like there's always different, outlooks and approaches. And I had a lot of friends that were just like scared to like come out and like, talk to their families or even approach them because of how a lot of like Mexican households can be about some topics like that. So was that
Yes.
difficult for you to like navigate through and express through your art?
Um, I would say yes and no. In my current situation, unfortunately, I don't have communication with um, like my dad's side of the family.
Mhm.
That's a long story. We won't get into that.
Yeah.
But I can look back and I can see aspects of like who I was even back then, where I'm like, oh, it's always been there, but I just wasn't in the environment that would allow myself to really get to know that part of me.
Mhm.
um so as an adult, kind of being having the space, having safer spaces,
Mhm.
um to really figure out who I am, and to step into that without judgment, without the fear of like um being ostracized, because that's already happened.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, cool. But I think what really helped too is like having friends who are also Latino themselves, who are also queer, and
Mhm.
getting to see and experience through people that I know, through my friend groups, through chosen family, that we do exist, and it's totally fine, and like these two things can coexist. Um, what I will say, like, the part where it does become difficult is when I do focus on, like, okay, now I'm going to present myself as
Hmm.
these two things that exist together, and how will I be received? That's where it gets more difficult. So, like, internally, I've been able to work that out, but
Hmm.
putting it out there for everyone else to receive and to either fully accept or to question or to reject, that's when it gets a lot more challenging, um, because there is a part of me that desperately wants to be, like, unquestionably accepted by, the community I come from.
Yeah.
um, and I know that that's definitely a hitch for some people, and you know um, I have to continually remind myself that, like, the people who are going to gatekeep, the people who are like, well, you're you don't check all of the boxes, or you're too X, Y, or Z.
Hmm.
Therefore, I'm not going to claim you or whatever. I have to remind myself, it's like, that's not the people that I want to surround myself with anyway.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
um, and it also brings comfort, again, as I was doing as just doing more research and, like, learning more about myself and about, like, Mexican history, and just queer history in general, knowing that really the modern world we live in, especially when it comes to queerness in community, um, the fact that, like, the whole gender binary, especially, and just, the erasure of queer identity, it really does come from, uh, like, the colonizers' influence, and
Hmm.
that queer identities have historically long been a huge and important part of indigenous communities, um, since, time immemorial. It brings me a lot of reassurance that, um, that I know who I am, and that, um, yeah,
No, yeah,
as
that's
a
so much. Because I mean, it's one of those things too. It's like you kind of get, one side of your community, essentially your family, people that you
Mhm,
know, kind of push you away, and it sounds like you've lost track of like some of them. And that I've heard that story so much from other
mhm,
friends and everything, and it's heartbreaking. But at the same time, you've also cultivated and opened up an entire open and loving community on the other end of that spectrum by being who you are and being a creator and an artist who's expressing themselves and having even a different niche, which is like being part of the Latin community as well. And
mhm,
bringing all that together and fusing into one makes it like one of the coolest, most exciting things. And just like along with your aesthetic and along with you doing everything independently, like it's remarkable and it's a lot to overcome because creating something in general is hard to overcome. Putting yourself
mhm,
out there in your artwork, putting your artwork in front of people, putting your idea or something that you did completely on your own, that's difficult because that's a lot of feedback. That's a lot of like, you just get so many, inner, dialogue of like fear
mhm.
and everything. I feel like every creator goes through that, but you also have battled through so much more. So it feels like that creator fear is like, even, minuscule compared to what you've gone through in your life. But you just seem so resilient in every single way of what you're overcoming, but also like building such a cool community, like even though like
Aw.
that one part is cut out, like there's like an entire, if we ever hung out at a con or saw people at a con, it's like it'd be so exciting to see you in person and like be part of that because like you said, like trying to find it online is sometimes difficult. And until you find those like other communities where you could really fit in and like open up and be yourself, it kind of feels weird. It's a little difficult. But once you do, it's like beautiful and it's exciting and you have so much encouragement behind you too. And I think that's why when I came across your profile and saw your art, that's what I was immediately first attracted to. And then just like learning more about you, and I was like, oh, it's a Latin creator. Like I'm always trying to bring out more Latin creators just because I feel like I don't know. We've had like William Keops Ibanez on with us, and like we need more Latin creators and like Christian Herrera and everything. But I love highlighting them just because that's from my region, that's where I'm from, and everything too. So it's cool. I just
Yeah.
love hearing your whole background because there's so much to like love and adore, and it's like I think there's so much more potential to be opened up behind you as you're working through your projects.